My name is Abhilasha. I am a vocal coach and the founder of Goalless Vocal Studio. In today's video, I want to be talking about the idea of singing from the stomach. Now, this particular advice is so common that pretty much most of us who've been singing for any amount of time might have come across this. In fact, most of my friends, my peers, the students that I work with have reported having received this advice at some point. You might also hear other related advice, such as sing with an open voice or sing from your diaphragm. And again, the same thing. It is usually left as a one and done piece of instruction with no context or no objective steps. And as a result, it becomes extremely easy to misinterpret this. The problem with misinterpreting this particular advice is that it will ironically create all the problems that you are trying to run away from right now. You will actually end up either fortifying those problems or just creating them when you actually didn't have any problems. Let's talk about why this particular advice is so popular and what people are trying to say when they are asking us to sing from our stomach. Singing happens best when airflow is controlled. So what is airflow then? The amount of air leaving your lungs and the speed at which it is leaving. So the job of controlling the airflow is that of our respiratory muscles. To really generalize, what we are looking at is the muscles in our core, in our torso, and also the pelvic floor. These are the muscles which are responsible for deciding how fast and how much air is leaving your lungs when you produce your voice. If your core is not doing the job of controlling airflow very well, then there will be some other muscles which will kick in and try to control the airflow. In our case, it is going to be the muscles of the throat, of the face, the jaw, even going as far as your forehead, the neck. All of these muscles can participate in trying to compensate for the shortcomings of your respiratory muscles. And this is what we are trying to avoid, because these muscles are not designed, they're quite small and they're not strong enough to actually control the amount and speed of air in a very efficient way. It will cost them more energy and it will sort of tire them out. So when people are asking us to sing from the stomach, what we have to read between the lines here is that they're asking us not to use the muscles of the throat and of the face to manipulate airflow. Instead, use the muscles of our core to manipulate airflow. This is what lies at the core of this advice. Now, what is up with the stomach, right? Like, why is the abdomen getting so much attention in this particular advice? So let's explore that in the next segment. Understanding what to do with the abdomen can in fact make a huge difference to your vocal flow, which is why I want you to listen to me as I explain a little bit of anatomy. Let us spend a few minutes understanding the basic design of breathing. How were we designed to breathe? This will really help us understand why the abdomen is such an important part of the whole breath process and why unnecessarily manipulating the abdomen might and will create problems for us. Step 1. The ribs open up, they lift up and elevate and essentially cause the diaphragm to come down and flatten. This part here, this section here is the rib cage. This giant sheet of muscle that you see, right, that is attached to the rib cage, this one right here, going into the other side as well, that is our diaphragm. Now, the diaphragm is often considered to be the main muscle of respiration. So what kind of a relationship do the ribs and the diaphragm have? Now, let's assume that my fingers are the rib cage, okay, and this notebook in this state is the diaphragm. So if this is the diaphragm and the ribs are my hands, then when the ribs lift up, the diaphragm tends to come down and flatten. And when the ribs descend, then the diaphragm goes up and sort of relaxes again. So ribs elevate, diaphragm comes down, ribs go down, diaphragm goes up. So step 2 is that the descending of the diaphragm causes the abdomen to move forward and to expand. Now, why does that happen? Again, the explanation is really quite simple. There are so many organs which are all very compactly packed into this space that you see internally here. And there is no room, there's no extra room. So if this is the diaphragm and the liver and the pancreas and the spleen are all here, if the diaphragm comes down, these organs getting squished is not an option. So in order to prevent that squishing of the organs, we somehow need to create extra space. And what then happens is, in order to accommodate these organs, the abdomen slightly protrudes forward. It expands so that these organs can fall into that extra space. Okay, I should not have named these as step 1, step 2, and step 3, because these are really just 3 things that should be happening. Oftentimes they happen simultaneously. But the third thing that should be happening is that the pelvic floor should contract. Now, where is the pelvic floor? This butterfly shaped bone that we see here is the pelvic bone, and all the muscles that are in this hollow space that we see are the pelvic floor. So if I re-add the muscles back again, these set of muscles, right, which are again forming that the floor of the pelvis basically, which is why it's called the pelvic floor, are going to contract. So they kind of mimic the diaphragm in the way that when the diaphragm comes down, if this is the diaphragm and this is the pelvic floor, the diaphragm comes down, the abdomen goes forward, and the pelvic floor also goes down. So we have this new space created for all these organs. A lot of us, because we're sitting all the time, we have forgotten how to recruit the pelvic floor in every breath. And as a result, a lot of us are breathing really shallowly, very poorly, if I have to be quite concise. So one of the first things that I do with my students is to actually teach them to recruit the pelvic floor so that every breath is basically going down the way it was designed to go down your body. If your pelvic floor is locked, it will lock up the abdomen and it will not allow the abdomen to protrude forward fully, right? And if the abdomen is not protruding, then the diaphragm will also not be able to descend throughout its entire range of motion. And if the diaphragm does not descend, then essentially there is no breath, because the diaphragm is the primary muscle of respiration. The amount of air that you breathe in is pretty much directly proportional to the descending of the diaphragm. So that is point number 1. Now let's have a discussion about why the abdomen needs to be understood if we want to breathe and sing in a healthy way. So let's look at the topmost layer that we've got going here. Now, if you take a look at this, you'll see quite, and even like a layperson can tell that this muscle, because it is attached to the rib cage and the pelvic bone, will have an impact on the movement of both these areas. People try to introduce unnecessary manipulation in the abdominal muscles, and as a result end up locking both their rib elevation and their pelvic floor activation. It's very important to know that anything that you do with the abdomen has to be intentional, because if you are introducing unnecessary tension into the system through misinterpreting the instruction, then you will actually go a couple of steps back. Like, it's not exactly helping anybody to manipulate the abdominal muscles unnecessarily. Another thing I want to address is how we need to pivot this conversation from singing from the stomach to singing from the core. So while yes, the abdominal muscles are a very important part of controlling airflow, they are not the only muscle group which is responsible for this. The entire core is participating in this process. So if we were to just take a spin, starting with the pelvic floor, the abdominal muscles, the side muscles, the muscles in the chest, some really large muscles in the back, the glutes, the muscles between your shoulder blades, some muscles going up into your neck. These are all participating in offering breath support. And so it would be wrong to say that we are singing from the abdomen alone. Yes, the abdomen needs to be understood, and it can potentially really create the difference between a very relaxed voice or a very not relaxed voice. But it is not the only thing that we need to worry about. There is a whole, I would say, process of learning how to recruit the other muscles, which is what I help my students do too. So yes, we have to pivot the conversation from singing from the stomach to singing from the core and learn to access activation in the entire core. So a little more about that in the upcoming sections. But before that, let's talk about what absolutely not to do. So now that you know what a regular inhale sort of entails, let's go ahead and take a look at the common things that people do when they are asked to sing from their stomach. Now, the most common, I would say, impression that singers get when they receive this advice, sing from your stomach, is that they have to do something to the abdominal muscles, right? They think that we have to use the stomach muscles. And how they end up using these muscles is, number one, they try to squeeze those muscles really hard. So you can see people kind of sucking their stomach in when they sing, that sort of a thing. The second thing that I often also see people doing is to tighten their stomach, sort of like when they are doing planks or push-ups or something, and then, when gym trainers ask you to brace your core. A similar feeling might be, say, you are constipated and straining in the bathroom, like that tightness that you feel in your core. A lot of times singers tend to have that activation going on throughout their song. The problem with both sucking your stomach in and keeping it tight is that we are introducing rigidity in these muscles. So that brings us to the next question. If we should not suck our stomach in and if we should not tighten the stomach, then what should we be doing with the abdominal muscles? What should we be doing with our belly? And for that, we need to understand a couple of things. The first thing we need to understand is breath support. Inhalation and exhalation are controlled by two different sets of muscles. Yeah, there is a separate set of muscles for inhalation and there's a separate set of muscles for exhalation. Now, another thing to know is that inhalation is an active process. It means that there is actually energy exerted in order to lift the ribs and open up the lungs, to fill them up. But the snapping back of the lungs happens pretty much by default. It's a thing that's going to happen whether or not we try. So pretty much like an elastic rubber band, right? Like even the lungs have elastic properties. So to pull it apart is an active process, but it coming back is a passive process. It's going to come back on its own. What is breath support then? If we let the ribs deflate at their own natural pace, for instance, you take a normal breath. Okay, if we want the lungs to empty out at this speed, it would be very difficult to have a voice because you might sound something like, "Wise men say," and you're done. Okay, it's not really conducive to producing a good voice, a good tone. Okay, instead, if the lungs are open for a slightly longer time, you will notice that the tone is clearer because we want much less air than "wise men say" in order for us to have a clean tone. So we want a thin, equal stream of air. And that's what we get by slowly controlling the deflation so that the right amount of air is leaving through your vocal folds. Okay, so then we get "wise men say only fools rush in." And now we're empty. "But I can't help falling in love with you." You get the idea, right? So this is what we need. We need the ribs to stay suspended, open in this position, and we want the lungs to deflate really, really slowly. And in order to do that, we need to have adequate amount of strength and training in the inhalation muscles, right? So that they can continuously stay active and help in that process of controlled deflation. So let's then go ahead and explore a few ideas which will really help you connect with breath support as it is normally experienced in our body. So breath support is quite commonly experienced when we cough, laugh, sneeze, yell. Now let's begin with coughing. Now coughing is a lot of air leaving your lungs all at once, and that is why the muscles of our core immediately brace themselves, right? You might have noticed whenever people are coughing for a really long time or have some really chronic illnesses, the reason why their cough sounds like like that is because their core muscles are they're not strong enough anymore. Their body is so weak, it's not able to offer that amount of breath support, and that is why all of that air kind of debilitates them with every cough, and that's why they get so tired so quickly. Versus in a normal person, when you cough, it is a very sort of, I would say, active thing, right? Like there is a little bit of a pulsation that you feel in your core, and that pulsation is breath support. So we can also try yelling. If you go, like, let's do a fake yell, yeah, not like a real one, but it's just like that. Okay, again, you feel that same sensation of your core bracing, and that is just breath support in action. Now, these are just really exaggerated forms of exhales, but when you are singing or speaking, you will still experience the same phenomenon, just at a much lesser degree. Now, the problem with sucking your stomach or tightening it is exactly the question of degree. Every sound that we produce demands a certain amount of breath support. For instance, if I go versus versus in all of these three cases, the airflow is very different, and so my core will also have to engage or activate in different extents. It's best to leave your abdominal muscles relaxed and passive, so that you, through a series of exercises, can familiarize yourself with how much activation you need for a particular phrase. When you leave your abdomen to stay responsive in this manner, you are really allowing your body to do what it knows best. You are not interfering with the process. You are allowing the abdominal muscles to respond. So it's not that they are completely jobless. They are doing something, but we are not making them do something. They are responding to the phrase, to the particular note, tone, whatever you're producing, and accordingly recruiting the proportionate amount of muscle responses. And this is exactly what we need to understand about singing from the abdomen, that the abdomen will work. The abdominal muscles are very important in controlling airflow, but we have to let the body toggle between different amounts of breath support and figure out what works for it best. If we try to engage the stomach consistently without respecting without respecting the contours of the song, right, we are going to end up creating more tension. We are going to try and come in the way of the body's natural breath support and basically create more tension and lock up the voice. If you want to know a little bit about how you can in fact get started with recruiting breath support to sort of learn what that feels like, I'm going to tag another video of mine. It is a two-part video, one on the inhale and one on the exhale, and especially the exhale segment will give you a lot of different cues as to how you can start developing good breath support. This is not being taught to us as it should be, and this is not exactly good, but I hope at least with the help of a video like this, you now understand what you should be seeking. Okay, that's very important. You should know what you should seek. You should know what sort of training you should be receiving in order for you to get maximum gains in your singing. I hope you found this useful. Until then, bye.